In late summer of 1980, the quiet resort town of State Line, nestled on the crystal-clear shores of Lake Tahoe, awoke to the sound of sirens. Here, among the pine trees and neon glow of the casinos, began a story that would go down in FBI history as one of the most baffling cases ever recorded in the United States. It all started early on the morning of August 26th. Bob Vinson, the senior administrator of Harvey's Resort Hotel and Casino, came down from his office and noticed that the door to the telephone room was standing open, a door that was always kept locked. Peering inside, he saw a strange object sitting in the middle of the room. It was a metallic gray box, about the size of a desk, with a smaller box mounted on top near the back right corner. The front of the smaller box was a control panel covered with 28 metal toggle switches, neatly arranged in 5 rows. Each switch was labeled with a number. All of them were flipped down, except for switch number 23, which was ominously set to the up position. It was around 6:30 a.m., and although Vincent had been on duty all night, he hadn't heard any noise that might suggest heavy equipment being moved in. He was certain that the thing hadn't been there an hour earlier. Whoever placed it had taken care to rest each corner on wooden blocks, which had left deep impressions in the red-orange carpet, clear evidence of its weight. Despite looking like some kind of electromechanical office machine, it had no power cord, no obvious switches, just those 28 mysterious toggles. To make matters worse, Vincent noticed that several keyholes on nearby doors had been hastily jammed with what looked like toothpicks and glue. On the carpet, next to the device, lay an envelope. Typed across it were the words, "Harvey's Management." Vincent rightly assumed it didn't contain anything as harmless as a bill. "Stay here," he told the janitor who had discovered the device with him. "Don't touch it. Don't let anyone touch it. I'll be right back." Moments later, Vincent returned with help, security staff from the nearby Wagon Wheel Casino, who then called in the sheriff's deputies and the fire department. Using a broom handle to make sure the envelope wasn't rigged with explosives, the responders carefully retrieved 3 pages of typed text. The letter claimed that the device was a bomb. Strict warning to management and bomb technicians: do not move or tilt this bomb. The detonation mechanism will trigger if it is shifted by as little as 0.01 on the Richter scale. Do not try to douse it with water or gas. A float switch and a barometric pressure sensor are attached to the detonators. Do not attempt to disassemble it. The screws are also connected to the detonators. Even a partial turn of a screw, 1/4 to 3/4 of a turn, will set it off. In short, this device is so sensitive that the slightest movement, inside or out, will cause an explosion. About 600 hotel guests and support staff had been ordered to leave the building because of a security emergency, and they were gathered in the parking lot when the sheriff's bomb squad entered and examined the device. Whatever its inner workings, the outer shell had been handcrafted with care. The boxes were made from 1/4-inch steel plates, neatly welded. Dents and seams had been filled with automotive body filler before painting. Bubble levels were installed at the corners, and threaded leveling feet had been used to align the unit on both axes. The squad informed Hera Gross, the casino owner, about the strange device and its hostile user instructions. Understandably, Gross was alarmed. His life's work had been put at mortal risk. He had founded the casino 36 years earlier, in 1944, as Harvey's Wagon Wheel Saloon and Gambling Hall, a 1-room log cabin on Lake Tahoe with 3 slot machines, a couple of card tables, and a wooden wagon wheel nailed to the wall. By 1980, Harvey Gross had turned that log cabin into a thriving hotel casino. The letter continued, "This bomb cannot be disassembled or rendered safe without causing detonation. Not even the maker can do it. Only after you receive the proper instructions can it be moved to a safe location for a controlled detonation, or to a place where a 3rd automatic timer will detonate it. There are 3 automatic timers, each set to a different explosion time. Only by following the instructions in this letter will you be given the steps to disable the first 2 timers and relocate the device to a site where it can be safely exploded. When it detonates, this bomb contains enough TNT to do serious damage to Harrah's across the street. That should give you an idea of the amount of TNT in this box. It is full of TNT. We recommend cordoning off a radius of at least 1,200 feet and removing everyone from the area. Rather than take the author at his word, the technicians laid out their full repertoire of intrusive tools and began a systematic examination, inside and out. They photographed the unit from every angle. They swept the area with a Geiger counter to rule out nuclear materials. They lifted prints from surfaces and found nothing. They scraped paint to collect samples for chemical analysis. They X-rayed the top and bottom of the boxes and sent the film off for development. They knelt beside the unit, pressed a stethoscope to its sides, and listened for moving parts. The room fell silent. At first, they heard nothing. Then, at the edge of audibility, someone thought they heard a faint humming. They waited and listened, and after a long pause, they heard it again. Something inside was running. Police and Harvey's security officers visited neighboring businesses to warn them of the looming threat. The Nevada National Guard evacuated civilians from the immediate area, while Harvey's staff removed millions of dollars in cash and negotiable instruments from the casino. Prudent deputies from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office shut off a 6-inch gas valve that supplied the building. FBI special agents from the Carson City Field Office arrived to take charge of the investigation. They set up a command post in the conference room on the second floor of the Sahara Tahoe Hotel Casino, a few hundred yards from Harvey's. On the edges of the evacuation zone, curious onlookers gathered. The letter went on to make demands. We demand $3 million in used $100 bills. They must be unmarked, free of tracking devices, and not chemically treated. If we find anything wrong with the money, we will stop following any instructions to move the bomb. When the X-ray film came back from the lab, the grainy black and white images appeared to confirm at least some of the claims made in the extortion letter. The X-rays of the head of the device showed numerous thin electrical wires running from screws, switches, and other indistinct components. A vertical tube sat in the center, possibly a crude tilt sensor. A float valve was clearly visible. The lower, larger housing was not as intricate as the head, but it was densely packed with cylinders full of something. Given more time, the explosives experts might have gathered enough information about the internal construction to disassemble the device safely or to determine whether it posed a real threat. But the letter demanded action within 24 hours. Furthermore, a row of toggles on the face of the device's head represented an added danger. The X-rays showed those toggles were connected to the internal circuitry, suggesting that the deactivation procedure might require setting the toggles to a specific combination, perhaps in an exact sequence. FBI special agents Yablonsky, Hawkins, and Jonke, together with fire department and sheriff's office personnel, met with Harvey Gross at the command center to decide what to do. One option was simply to pay the ransom. Gross's reply was unambiguous: "I will never pay those bastards a dime." But doing nothing was reckless because too many questions remained unanswered. Was there really a timer inside the device? If so, when would it reach zero? The letter spoke of 24 hours, but it did not say when the clock started. Even if there were no timer, how could they circumvent the alleged suite of tamper detectors inside? And was the box really packed with TNT, or was that a bluff? The instructions for delivering the money were as follows. The money will be delivered by helicopter. The helicopter pilot must park at 11 p.m., as close as possible to the LTA building by the traffic light at the Lake Tahoe Airport. The pilot must be alone in the cockpit and unarmed. The pilot must exit the aircraft and stand by the gate of the chain-link fence. He is to wait for further instructions, which will be relayed by a rented taxi. The taxi driver will know nothing. The instructions may also be delivered by a private individual or by the nearest payphone at exactly 12:10 a.m. In Los Angeles, Special Agent Joe Cook boarded an FBI helicopter, completed the pre-flight checklist, lifted off, and set course north-northwest. He had been ordered to ferry the helicopter to South Lake Tahoe as quickly as possible to receive further instructions. He landed at a prearranged spot in a ski area parking lot shortly after 11 p.m., where fellow agents brought large packages to the aircraft. While the agents stowed the bags inside the helicopter, one of them told Cook that the packages contained the ransom. Inside the parcels was cash taken from Harvey's hotel cage, but only a thin top layer sufficient for a cursory inspection. Each genuine bill was laid on top of a stack of ordinary paper cut to the same dimensions and colored to resemble money. Agent Cook was instructed to fly to the Lake Tahoe airport, land near the phone booth, refuel, and wait to be contacted by the extortionist. When Cook took off, an armed agent concealed himself behind the pilot's seat with explicit orders to protect the pilot's life at all costs. The pilot's instructions were as follows. The helicopter must be fully fueled. Do not bring any weapons. All radio frequencies will be monitored. You are not to communicate with anyone once you arrive at the airport. Do not try to be a hero. Follow orders exactly. You will make 5 landings, none of which will be at an airfield. Each landing zone will have adequate lighting. The terrain will be fairly level, with one site having a slope of about 2 degrees. Each area will be cleared within a radius of over 200 feet. We don't want trouble, but we will make you regret it if you cause any. Have a safe landing. Just before midnight, Special Agent Cook landed the helicopter at the Lake Tahoe airport and shut down the engine. While the fuel truck topped off the tank, Cook followed the letter's instructions and stood near a payphone. At about 10 minutes past midnight, the phone rang. "Your instructions are under the table in front of you," said a man's voice. "You have 3 minutes." There was no table in front of him, but the caller hung up before Cook could ask for clarification. He ran to the nearest picnic tables and checked underneath, but found nothing. Racing back to the phone, mindful of the 3-minute deadline, he ran his hands under the metal shelf. His fingers brushed something taped there. Cook peeled off an envelope secured with layers of tape beneath the phone shelf. It was addressed simply, "To the pilot." The note inside was typed, just like the original ransom letter. After reading these instructions, open the helicopter door and shine a bright flashlight inside, inch by inch. If the helicopter is a 4-seater, fold the front seat backs forward for a better view. After that, you are ready for takeoff. Make sure no one is standing near the helicopter and that no one boards it. We are watching you. From the moment of the phone call, you have 3 minutes to get airborne. Fly west along Highway 50, keeping to the right-hand side. Stay below 500 feet above ground level. About 15 miles west of the airport, start looking to your right for a flashing beacon. A radar will be aimed at a 45-degree angle towards you and will automatically activate the strobe light when you are in range. Again, no communication of any kind with anyone. You will have 4 minutes to land after the strobe light activates, because after 4 minutes, all lights will automatically go out. The site faces south. Approximately 6 feet to the south, nailed to a tree about 6 feet above the ground, you will find an envelope with further instructions. Cook returned to the helicopter and illuminated the cabin with a small flashlight, careful to keep the beam away from the armed agent crouched behind the pilot's seat. Then he strapped in, started the engine, and lifted off once more. Following the note's instructions, he stayed below 500 feet and flew west toward Highway 50, then followed it for 15 miles. He began circling low over the forested mountains, searching for the promised strobe beacon. Down below, dozens of FBI agents cruised along Highway 50 in unmarked cars, while high above, another FBI aircraft orbited in silent observation. But there was no beacon visible in any direction. Perhaps the full moon was too bright. Cook searched in wide loops for more than an hour until he was nearly out of fuel. Frustrated, he returned to the airport, landed, and waited by the payphone to see if the extortionist would reach out again. The phone stayed silent. Only later, rereading the note, did Cook realize that the author hadn't told him to follow the highway, but to fly toward it, and then continue in a straight line. He had been several miles off course. On a grassy clearing about 20 miles west of the airport, roughly 5 miles farther than the letter had described, 58-year-old Big John Burgess sat under the full moon with his 18-year-old son, Jimmy, contemplating their situation. The night had already been a long one. About 2 hours earlier, they had driven there in Big John's gold Volvo, accompanied by his other son, John Jr. Their destination was that same clearing along the winding mountain road known as Ice House Road. When they arrived, They realized they had forgotten to bring the 12-volt car battery needed to power their heavy-duty strobe light. They turned back toward Highway 50 to find a portable power source. The trio spotted a neglected Volkswagen parked beside what looked like an abandoned gas station. They stopped and opened the passenger door to remove the car battery. But midway through their effort, the gas station door flew open and out stumbled a wiry man who unleashed a furious string of curses with a gun in his hand. The would-be battery thieves abandoned their plan and fled in the Volvo. They drove 20 miles to Placerville before spotting the Shell Colvin station with a light on in the service window. Big John pulled in, walked up to the bulletproof glass, and asked the night attendant for a car battery. The clerk asked what make of car the battery was for. "Doesn't matter," Big John said. But the parts man would not budge. He didn't want to sell a battery that might not fit. "Batteries come in different shapes and sizes," he explained. "Sometimes the terminals sit on the side instead of the top." Big John repeated that he didn't care. "If you take the wrong type, it won't fit in the compartment," the irritated clerk insisted, "or the terminals won't match." "Any kind will do," Big John said. The stubborn contest lasted several minutes before the clerk gave up and sold him the first battery he could reach. Big John returned to the car with the battery in hand, and the three of them raced back up the mountain toward the clearing, barely losing any time. But they were still too late. By the time they arrived, the helicopter, having failed to find a signal at the designated point, had already been forced to turn back. John Jr. dropped his father and brother off by the meadow and drove back to a nearby roadside diner to call the pilot from a payphone. Big John and Jimmy set up the strobe, ran a quick check, shut it off, and waited. According to the plan, the pilot was to land near the strobe and find the envelope with further instructions. But the Burgess brothers had ski masks, a bag of weapons, and a scheme to hijack the helicopter and its $3 million while the pilot hunted for a non-existent note in the woods. Their plan was to take off in the helicopter and fly to another clearing where John Jr. and the Volvo would be waiting to retrieve the dropped money bags. Then Big John and Jimmy would fly to Cameron Park Airport, land, and meet their driver, Big John's girlfriend, Joan Williams. From there, they'd all rendezvous at Big John's home in Fresno, California, $3 million richer. The letter also contained a warning. There will be no extensions or renegotiation. The demands are firm, no matter what. The transaction must be completed within 24 hours. If the terms are not met, we will not contact you again and will ignore any attempts to reach us. If you try to cheat us, we have the means to emplace another bomb. If everything went according to plan, the helicopter would reach the meadow around 12:40 a.m. Minutes passed as they listened for the thrum of rotors, but the night remained quiet. At one point, Big John and Jimmy thought they heard a distant plane and briefly switched on the strobe, but the sound faded and did not return. 12:40 came and went, then 1:40, then 2:40, and they had to admit there would be no helicopter. They packed up their illicit gear and left. John, Big John Burgess Sr., was twice divorced, suffering from cancer, and a failed extortionist, but not long before he'd been a flamboyant millionaire. Born in 1922 in Hungary as János Burgess, he spent his early years in Budapest. In 1944, when the Germans occupied his country, he entered the Royal Hungarian Air Force and was posted to an aging Messerschmitt Bf 109 to fend off Russian attacks. According to Burgess, between 1944 and 1955, he was arrested by the Gestapo, escaped, was recruited by U.S. intelligence, captured by the Soviets and sent to the Gulag, then released and returned to Hungary. There, in a restaurant in 1956, he met Elizabeth Newell and proposed after just 2 dances. She divorced her husband, married János, and in 1957 emigrated with him to the United States. János adopted the anglicized name John. From the outside, the next 12 years of the Burgess household looked almost picturesque. The family settled in Fresno, California. While Elizabeth raised their 2 sons, John Jr. and Jimmy, Big John learned to install irrigation systems and built a small landscaping business. Over time, he hired crews and secured contracts with California municipalities and golf courses across the state. By his 50s, he had become a working millionaire. He also bought the popular Villa Basque restaurant. Burgess kept flying as an avocation and even tried his hand at piloting a helicopter a couple of times. But behind the closed doors of his home, John Burgess Sr. was a tyrant. He used belts and electrical cords to beat his wife and sons when they displeased him. He scattered gravel across the hard kitchen floor and forced the boys to kneel on it when they shirked chores. Finally, in 1973, Elizabeth filed for divorce. She moved out, but not far, into a neighboring trailer so she could remain close to the boys. For years, Big John had been a gambler, but after the divorce, it became his habit to fly his personal 6-seat Beechcraft Bonanza up to Lake Tahoe, just over the California-Nevada line. He always left his sons a cornucopia of packed frozen provisions so he could be gone for weeks at a stretch. He played all over town and built a reputation as a high roller. His favorite spot was the blackjack pit at Harvey's Wagon Wheel, where they treated him like royalty. Free drinks, free meals, free rooms, while he steadily lost his fortune in their favor. He was even once invited to spend a few days at Harvey Gross's ranch. When Big John's bank accounts ran dry, he began selling off the equipment from his landscaping business and eventually sold the whole operation, contracts and all. In July 1975, Elizabeth Burgess disappeared. Her car remained in the driveway, and her purse was left in the trailer. 3 days later, her body was found in a field near the house. Her blood showed elevated hemoglobin combined with a fatal dose of alcohol and Valium. Police detectives ruled it a suicide. Big John cremated her remains and then, in front of the boys, overturned the urn and scattered the ashes in the yard. After Elizabeth's death, 53-year-old Big John trimmed his sideburns, thinned his mustache into a pencil line, and began wearing expensive suits. The following year, he married an 18-year-old waitress from his restaurant, but that marriage lasted less than a year. 2 years later, in 1978, he began seeing Joan Williams, a respected deputy probation officer in the Fresno Probation Department who also worked weekends at Villa Basque. She eventually became one of the conspirators in his plot against Harvey. Sometime after Joan and Big John started dating, Villa Basque burned to the ground. Big John collected $300,000 in insurance and then steadily lost it at blackjack trying to get his money back. He sold his house to placate the collectors. On one humiliating evening, Harvey's staff asked him and his girlfriend to vacate a complimentary room so they could reassign it to another guest. The IRS was after him for unpaid taxes. He felt crushed and went to a doctor who found abdominal cancer. In surgery, doctors removed nearly half of his intestines. Burgess contemplated suicide, but kept gambling. Over the years, he had lost about $600,000 at Harvey's card tables. It was under these pressures that he conceived the plan to build and deliver what he later called the machine to Harvey's. Coming down the mountain after the failed helicopter rendezvous, Big John and Jimmy saw John Jr. coming toward them in the gold Volvo. The Volvo's front fender had a new large dent, and Joan was in the passenger seat instead of driving her own car. John Jr. pulled over and explained that he'd hit a deer on the dark country roads, hence the bent fender. Joan said she had lost control and gone off the shoulder while trying to keep up with John Jr. on the hilly, winding Icehouse Road. They did, however, bring one piece of good news. Joan had been listening to the radio while waiting by the airport and heard a news bulletin about a 2:45 a.m. press conference. Nevada Governor Bob List publicly asked the person giving the instructions to provide a clarifying message. The hotel stands ready to comply, and, as always, stands ready to act, the governor told a stunned throng of bleary-eyed reporters. Perhaps the extortion opportunity had not yet been completely lost. The Burgess dropped Joan at a Placerville hospital for a bit of repair work, then drove to a parts store where John Jr. used a payphone to call the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. It was 6:43 a.m., just over 24 hours since Bob Vinson had discovered the device. John Jr. told the dispatcher that the bomb squad should flip toggle switch number 5 on the device and await further instructions. John Jr. knew that switch was one of the dummy ones, but the move bought time to decide on a plan. Back at the command center, the improvisational bomb committee gathered around the negotiation table. The group included FBI special agents, the local fire chief, the state fire marshal, a military bomb disposal unit, representatives of the Nuclear Emergency Support Team, and scientists from the Navy's Surface Warfare Center and the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Amid clouds of cigarette smoke and the occasional ringing of rotary phones, they debated the instruction to flip switch number 5. It might slow or disable internal timers, as the extortion letter implied. It might be a trap intended to force the extortionist to trigger the device prematurely, or it might simply be a delaying tactic. Whatever the case, they had to assume the maker had made no wiring mistakes. That flip of number 5 might short something out. In any event, the device had already been sitting there, humming, for longer than the 24 hours demanded in the ransom note. The bomb committee, it seemed, had a little breathing room. The team consulted experts from around the country. During one of those calls, someone from the U.S. Navy's Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit floated an idea, and the other investigators agreed it was the least bad option. They shared the plan with Harvey Gross: use a linear-shaped charge to decapitate the mysterious device. That would almost certainly trigger the tilt sensor, but with luck, the precise surgical blast would sever the electric lines in less than a millisecond before any low-voltage detonation signal could reach the explosive charge below. If it worked, the damage to the room would be limited. If they failed to outrun the electrical impulse, and if those dark cylinders in the lower section really were TNT and not inert material, the consequences would be far worse. Harvey Gross was on familiar terms with most of his staff and was genuinely worried about what would happen if the bomb damaged or destroyed his business. The investigators did not dither, especially after the bomb techs reported a change in the noises coming from inside the device, as if something had become stuck. With no better alternative, Gross approved the consultant's proposal. In the green glow of a monochrome CRT monitor, the mixed team of specialists modeled the shaped charge on a computer. They formed C4 into the prescribed shape, mounted it on a wooden block, and returned to the shuttered Harvey's diner. They placed their precisely engineered 2x4 on a neat stack of telephone directories beside the strange machine. They also hastily built sandbag shielding around the device to absorb some of the blast energy. The Nevada National Guard expanded the evacuation perimeter. Before leaving, staff at Caesars opened windows and drew drapes in rooms facing Harvey's to reduce potential blast damage. Police cruisers drove through the streets, broadcasting, "An explosive device may detonate soon. Please take shelter for your safety." Just outside the half-mile evacuation zone, news cameras and sightseers craned to watch from behind barricades. Rumors spread that some local casinos were even taking bets on whether the device would explode and when. At 3:46 p.m. on August 27, 1980, 34 hours after the device was discovered, the bomb techs left Harvey's pub and crossed the parking lot toward the blast site near Harvey's Pancake House. They took cover behind a parked truck. The empty streets and shuttered buildings lent the moment an eerie stillness. The nearest people stood nearly half a mile away, silently awaiting the outcome. Captain Frank Daniel held the leads to the shaped charge's remote detonator. Trinitrotoluene, TNT, is a compound first isolated by the German chemist Julius Wilbrand in 1863. It is a pastel yellow solid that, before 1899, had been used mainly as a dye until German military chemists mixed it with aluminum and realized its potential as a mild explosive. Its power is only about 60% of the most energetic alternative explosives. Its appeal lies in relative stability. It's hard to detonate accidentally, which makes it safer to handle and transport. Over time, it became widely known by its initials, TNT. Contrary to the extortion letter's claim, there was no TNT in John Burgess's contraption. The mysterious cylinders seen on the blurred X-rays were a different chemistry entirely. Tubes filled with a gelatinous nitroglycerin mixture, dynamite. There was roughly half a ton of it. Concrete spat from the walls of the 11-story Harvey's wagon wheel tower in fountains of pulverized masonry. Distant gawkers, some now wearing T-shirts that read, "I got bombed in Tahoe," cheered morbidly as shards of glass, wood dust, and building fragments streaked skyward like meteors. Neighboring structures shuddered, windows shattered. Concrete chips fell like hail, and within minutes, paper debris rained down like dirty confetti. Harvey Gross refused to speak to the press, but colleagues later said they saw tears in his eyes as he stared at the scarred building. Big John and Jimmy Burgess were in their Volvo when a special news bulletin came over the radio. A massive explosion had ripped through Harvey's wagon wheel in Lake Tahoe, Nevada, confirming reports that a powerful bomb had been brought into the building the night before. Jimmy later described his father as crushed by the news. Big John's diabolical plot had failed and the money was gone. Later, watching the disaster on television, Big John seemed to wrench himself out of the depths of self-pity. The blast had worked just as the pros had planned. Professional assessment found that the tower's damage, while extensive, was repairable. The sandbag shielding absorbed much of the blast energy, and the building's structural integrity remained intact. Because the evacuation had been complete, there were no casualties. Cleanup and repairs began almost immediately. FBI agents carefully cataloged every fragment they could find. Those fragments, together with the X-rays of the device and later witness testimony, allowed the Bureau to reconstruct a reasonably complete picture of the machine's inner workings. The upper box housed a complex nervous system made up of several independent electrical circuits, each powered at one end by a flashlight battery and connected at the other end to electric detonators. If a battery charged a detonator, the dynamite would go off, but that outcome was prevented by an open switch in each circuit. Inside the device, investigators identified 7 types of switches. Timer. The machine did contain a long delay timer, the sort commonly used in irrigation systems. No one but Big John knew the exact setting, but its maximum delay was roughly 8 days. If it reached its cycle's end, it would close the detonator circuit. Tilt sensor. One sensor was a conductive metal pendulum suspended inside a conductive metal tube. If the box tilted even slightly or was vibrated excessively, the pendulum would swing and touch the tube wall, closing the detonation circuit. Float valve. In the top housing sat a float mechanism, much like those in ordinary toilet tanks. If water, foam, or any liquid lifted the float, it would close the circuit. Spring-loaded screw switches. Each flathead screw that fastened the lid to the upper box was wired to a spring-loaded switch capable of closing a detonation circuit. Pressure relays. The lids of the lower containers depressed pressure relays, similar to those that turn off refrigerator lights when the door is closed. Attempting to open any container would close the circuit. Conductive foil. Interior surfaces of the boxes were lined with rubber sheets coated in conductive foil. If a metal tool, a drill bit or saw blade, pierced the outer shell and rubber lining, it would create a conductive path between the metal shell and the foil. Matching foil placed between the upper and lower boxes would detect separation and close the circuit. Toggle switches. Some of the 28 toggles on the device's face were dummies. A few could disable the tilt sensor and allow limited movement of the machine before the timer expired. Flipping any of the other toggles, however, would close a detonation circuit and immediately trigger the dynamite. The bomb committee had been right to conclude the device's brain was physically separated from its muscle and that low-voltage wiring linked the two. What they had not anticipated was that the mad engineer had placed several additional dynamite sticks in the upper box as a failsafe, precisely to punish the intrusive work the EOD teams might attempt. Dynamite is simultaneously more powerful and more temperamental than TNT. If the box had been packed with TNT, as the letter claimed, a shaped charge beheading might have had a chance. But it remains unclear what actually provoked the main explosion, the unsecured dynamite or the tilt sensor. It remained unclear whether Big John deliberately lied in the ransom letter about the type of explosive inside the box, or whether he was influenced by the common misconception that TNT and dynamite are the same thing. The error seems unlikely, given his otherwise impressive technical know-how. It may simply have been a misunderstanding with Joan Williams, who is believed to have served as the operations official typist. FBI investigators requested and obtained witness statements from people who had been inside or near Harvey's wagon wheel early on the morning of Tuesday, August 26, 1980, the day the device appeared. Hundreds of potential suspects were identified, But a pattern soon emerged in some reports. At about 5:30 a.m., several witnesses saw two men in blue coveralls unloading a large object from a white Dodge van, something that looked like office equipment wrapped in a cover crudely bearing an IBM-style logo. The van carried no markings, except for a small sticker reading something like, "Do not disturb passengers in this vehicle while it is rocking." Movers rolled a covered cart into Harvey's lobby. Around August 26, the FBI announced its interest in a white Dodge van in the Tahoe area and offered a $200,000 reward for useful information. That lead produced some tips, and a few suspects ultimately testified before a grand jury, but none of the testimony produced enough evidence to bring charges. After all, white Dodge vans were not exactly rare in that area. While agents continued their months-long investigation, repairs at Harvey's went forward. Harvey Gross reopened the rebuilt hotel tower on May 13, 1981, after spending $18 million on repairs and upgrades. The renovated tower featured a gleaming glass facade, luxurious Italian granite, new tile, and an upgraded security and video surveillance system. With no promising leads, the FBI raised the reward to $500,000, an almost unheard-of sum for the time. About a month later, an anxious, anonymous caller phoned the Fresno FBI office, claiming to know the identity of the person who had placed the bomb at Harvey's. After several phone conversations, agents persuaded the caller to meet in person at a local motel. The informant said he had once dated a woman who told him everything about the plot before it was carried out. That woman had learned the plan from her ex-boyfriend, a young man named John Burgess Jr. Agents were already questioning John Jr., and that fact got their attention. He had driven a white Dodge van, and a plate number matching his van appeared on a hotel registration in the Tahoe area for the night before the bomb was delivered. But John Jr. gave agents an account of why he had been in Tahoe that night, and his story did not initially prompt further questions. Much of what he said was corroborated by things visible at his home in Fresno during questioning. He insisted he had not been on Icehouse Road on the day the device was discovered or the following day. However, the new informant added one crucial detail. The extortion plot was organized by his father, John Burgess Sr. Agents checked Big John's background to assess his suitability as a suspect, and an unsanitized federal biography proved compelling. He was an ex-serviceman with a working knowledge of electronics, welding, and explosives. He was a pilot. He had once been a millionaire and was now deep in debt to numerous creditors, including substantial arrears to Harvey's wagon wheel. FBI Special Agent Bill Jonke, one of the lead investigators on the Harvey extortion, moved to Fresno with several other agents to pursue the Burgess angle. The team deployed virtually every intel-gathering technique of the 1980s, short of truth serum. They hypnotized the Fresno informant, wired him for sound, and sent him to confront his ex-girlfriend to confirm her story. They asked John Jr. to take a polygraph. He said he would think about it, and apparently never did. Agents also tried to perform a forensic sweep of the Dodge van, but John Jr. had sold it months earlier. They tracked down the new owner, but searches for latent prints and paint flakes came up empty. Jonke and two other agents visited the 59-year-old Big John at his home and asked what he knew about the bombing conspiracy. He replied that he had heard about it on TV. He admitted he was a regular at Harvey's pub and that he still owed the casino money. When asked for permission to search the house, Burgess said the home technically belonged to his girlfriend Joan, so he could not legally consent to a search, but he agreed to show them his backyard workshop. During the tour, the agents noticed gray aerosol paint, body filler, sheet metal, an oxyacetylene torch, and welding gear. When asked directly whether he had been involved in the extortion, Big John scoffed and launched into a detailed, hypothetical monologue about how he would have pulled it off if he had done it. Agents put the house under surveillance and knocked on his door many times over the following weeks, receiving varying degrees of hospitality. On August 14, 1981, FBI agents again brought 20-year-old John Jr. in for questioning. They told him they knew he had lied about his movements on August 25 to 27 the previous year. They had a speeding ticket in his name issued the morning after the failed extortion, The citation placed him in the gold Volvo with two other men. They had a report of Joan Williams's car accident on Icehouse Road that same morning, near the spot where the helicopter had been directed to land, and a record of her hospital visit in the same area. Witnesses had placed John Jr. there. Agents charged him with making false statements to a grand jury, a serious federal offense, and told him his only chance at leniency from the U.S. attorney was to tell the FBI everything he knew about the bombing. They offered Jimmy the same deal. Unlike earlier interrogations, this approach worked. John and Jimmy stopped hiding details. Their separate interviews were consistent with each other and with the available evidence in all material respects. The next day, Big John and Joan left their Fresno neighborhood in the gold Volvo and were abruptly boxed in by two unmarked sedans that pulled across the road in front of them. FBI agents emerged and arrested the couple on charges that included conspiracy to interfere with interstate commerce by threats of violence, interstate travel with intent to extort, transporting explosives in interstate commerce, and conspiracy to extort. During the Las Vegas trial, John Jr. and Jimmy told the jury about their harrowing childhood and their father's parabola of a life, from poor immigrant to self-made millionaire to bankrupt extortionist. When their father first told them he planned to rebuild his fortune by constructing and planting a bomb, the boys laughed out loud. What a joke. But the joke began to feel real when Big John drove them in the middle of the night to a hydroelectric construction site near Wishon Reservoir, cut the padlock off a storage shed with a torch, and ordered them to help load boxes of dynamite and detonators into a Dodge van. Even then, they claimed they didn't take it seriously. The prank spiraled out of control when Big John enlisted Joan and Jimmy to help pack the dynamite into a large metal box he had been fabricating for weeks. Then he asked his sons to deliver the bomb to Harvey's, but they refused. So Big John hired two former employees from his landscaping company to handle the job. The movers rolled the bomb into an elevator at Harvey's and met Big John in a utility room. He had swapped his usual clothes for a parka, cowboy hat, glasses, and a month's worth of stubble so that regulars who might recognize him wouldn't. Big John jammed the locks with toothpicks and glue to prevent interference, leveled the box, activated the detonation circuits, and the team slipped away. His hired helpers later claimed they realized what they had handled only after the explosion. The FBI built a full cross-section replica of Big John's device to demonstrate its complexity to the jury, complete with circuitry, traps, and detonators, minus the real explosives. On the stand, John Burgess Sr. admitted he had built the bomb, but insisted it was for self-defense. He spun a dubious tale about mafia-connected fixers from Harvey's forcing him to build and plant the device as part of an insurance scam, a kind of criminal pyramid scheme. These shadowy figures, he said, gave him an ultimatum: destroy the casino or be destroyed himself. His credibility collapsed when prosecutors revealed that after the failed first attempt, he had stolen more explosives and planned a second extortion using a homemade, remotely operated rocket launcher. Jimmy Burgess led agents to a dry creek bed where a new cache of dynamite had been buried. On March 7, 1985, after years of legal battles, a jury found John Burgess Sr. guilty on 8 of 9 counts, and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The two men who had delivered the bomb, Willis Brown and Terry Hall, each received 7 years. Joan Williams was sentenced to 27 months. Neither John Jr. nor Jimmy Burgess served time. Both were charged as accessories, but received suspended sentences in exchange for cooperation. Big John was sent directly to the federal penitentiary in Lompoc, California. He never saw his sons again, though he occasionally phoned or wrote, claiming he'd been framed. He died of liver cancer in the Southern Nevada Correctional Center in 1996 at the age of 74. Harvey Gross's hotel casino still stands on the shores of Lake Tahoe, though after Gross's death in 1983, it was absorbed by an entertainment conglomerate. Today, it's known simply as Harvey's. The wagon wheel and the apostrophe are long gone, and nowhere on the building is there a plaque, a photo, or even a mention that a machine with a mysterious inner mechanism once sat inside, built to rob a man of his fortune. Decades after, the machine tore apart part of Harvey's wagon wheel, Big John's masterpiece bomb remains legendary within the FBI. Agents admit that even modern bomb squads, with all their advanced technology, would likely have made little progress defusing Big John's improvised explosive without triggering it. The replica built for the trial is still used as a training aid in the Bureau's laboratories. According to retired Special Agent Bill Jonke, in a 2005 interview with the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the Harvey bomb was the largest domestic explosive device ever detonated in the United States until the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And yet, the Harvey extortion case has largely faded from public memory. When asked why so few people today remember what happened at Lake Tahoe on August 26 to 27, 1980, Jonke's answer was brief. Nobody died.